I began the show talking about some of Donald Trump's day one executive orders on everything from architecture to drug cartels. But there's one executive order that I didn't talk about because it deserves its own extended monologue. So saving it for here. And that's Trump's executive order that officially ends gender ideology in the government and establishes a very clear definition of male and female, namely the definition that's been recognized throughout all of human history until 15 seconds ago. In a second, I'm going to read extensively from this order because this is a monumental moment in American history. It's also a very well-crafted document that sets out in plain English the truth about gender ideology, which is a fight that, of course, I've been personally waging for many years through my film, What is a Woman?, investigations into barbarism in places like Vanderbilt, testimony at the Tennessee legislature to enact a ban on child mutilation that's now before the U.S. Supreme Court, and so on. There have been so many others who are pivotal in this fight, from Chaya Wright-Schick of Libs of TikTok to Riley Gaines, Billboard Chris, Colin Wright, Chloe Cole, many others. Trans activists have done everything in their power to prevent a moment like this from happening. And in my case, as you know, part of my story, they forced my family from our home, attempted to destroy my life and my family over the course of years. They've threatened us along with anyone else who attempted to speak the truth about such a fundamental issue. And they knew all along that their position was incoherent and wrong, so they had to resort to these kinds of tactics to have any hope of winning. But they haven't won. They have lost in spectacular fashion. They've lost everything. They are losers. And I want every trans activist who hears this to know that you lost. You are losers. We won. We beat you. And I hope it makes you sad to hear that. I hope it causes you great grief and misery, because that will only be a fraction of the misery that you brought into this world and inflicted on innocent people, especially children, many of whom are going to have to live with the damage you did to them for the rest of their lives. So you deserve all of this humiliation. And I'm glad that you're experiencing it. I'm glad that I could be a part, just a part in making you feel so miserable. I'm really happy about that. Everything that these thugs have been working to build, all the lies and propaganda and nonsense they've piled up, has come crashing down like one big grotesque Jenga tower. This executive order is not achieving that victory on its own. Of course, this is a fight, as I said, that's been waged for many years by many people. But this is, I think, in a lot of ways, the final nail in the coffin. The executive order that Donald Trump just signed is entitled Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. Yesterday, Trump alluded to the order during his inaugural address, and then later in the day, he signed it. Watch.
There are only two genders, male and female.
Protecting women from radical gender ideologies.
Mr. President, going back to the World Health Organization.
Now, on one level, it's surreal that a president even has to issue an order like this or make a proclamation that there are only two genders. 20 years ago, it would be like a president declaring the sky is blue or water is wet. It's like an executive order clarifying that 2 + 2 = 4. But trans activists in the Democrat Party have insisted on denying one of the most basic fundamental truths of biology. And until recently, a lot of people, including a lot of conservatives, were too afraid to respond to this madness with the truth. But those days appear to be very much over. The executive order that Donald Trump just signed is one of the most well-written, well-reasoned takedowns of gender ideology that I've ever seen. And more importantly, it has the force of law. It ends this madness in the government permanently. It is a death knell to federal funding for this insanity, and it will help facilitate gender ideology's trip to the dustbin of history. Here's how the order begins. Quote, across the country, ideologues who deny the biological reality of sex have increasingly used legal and other socially coercive means to permit men to self-identify as women and gain access to intimate single-sex spaces and activities designed for women, from women's domestic abuse shelters to women's workplace showers. This is wrong. Efforts to eradicate biological reality of sex fundamentally attack women by depriving them of their dignity, safety, and well-being. The erasure of sex in language policy has a corrosive impact not just on women, but on the validity of the entire American system. Basing federal policy on truth is critical to scientific inquiry, public safety, morale, and trust in government itself. Close quote. So that's the preamble, and it's very good, and it establishes the stakes very clearly and plainly. A society that doesn't respect truth is incapable of functioning. There's that famous quote that those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And it's true, because once you tell people that the truth is meaningless, then any kind of rational discourse is impossible. Lived experience replaces actual truth, in reality, and anything can be considered truth. Anything can therefore be justified. But sanity seems to be prevailing now. The order very directly states that men cannot self-identify as women under any circumstance. It doesn't matter how much they whine on TikTok or try to get you fired from your job. The truth is the truth, and it doesn't change. Then the order gets into specifics. Quote, it's the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female. These sexes are not changeable and are grounded in fundamental and incontrovertible reality. This order specifically dismisses the entire concept of gender identity. Quote, gender identity reflects a fully internal and subjective sense of self, disconnected from biological reality and sex, and existing on an infinite continuum that does not provide a meaningful basis for identification and cannot be recognized as a replacement for sex. Close quote. Now, again, this is the kind of argument that people like myself and others have been making for years now. And 10 years ago, it was not something it was something that hardly any elected Republican was willing to say out loud. It certainly would not have been written into an executive order, but times have changed. Then the order does what trans activists are incapable of doing, which is defying the terms. Quote, sex shall refer to an individual's immutable biological classification as either male or female. Sex is not a synonym for and does not include the concept of gender identity. Women or woman and girls or girls shall mean adult and juvenile human females, respectively. Men or man and boys or boy shall mean adult and juvenile human males, respectively. Female means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. Male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell. Close quote. Okay. So there's your terms defined very clearly. Now, if you watched What is Woman, you know how hard it is to get alleged experts in the field of gender ideology to provide any kind of definition for man or woman. Instead, they'll give you circular explanations that don't make any sense at all. They'll say a woman is someone who says she's a woman, and as the executive order points out, that is completely incoherent. Again, it makes the point as well as you can make it, to the point that, and this has been very rare with like documents written by elected Republicans, but I reading the executive order, I couldn't have written it any better myself. I wouldn't add anything to it. This is exactly what I would say, which is pretty remarkable. Quote, going back to the executive order, gender ideology includes the idea that there's a vast spectrum of genders that are disconnected from one's sex. Gender ideology is eternally inconsistent in that it diminishes sex as an identifiable or useful category, but nevertheless maintains that it's possible for a person to be born in the wrong sexed body. Close quote. Now, the order goes on to ban men from women's prisons. It blocks federal funds from being used to promote gender ideology in any way, including by funding sex changes for prisoners. Federal contractors are affected by the order as well. The order also ensures that a person's biological sex is on their government ID, including their passports. It empowers the Attorney General and other law enforcement officials to go to court to enforce these measures. And all of this would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. And already the corporate press is predictably freaking out about this. CNN, for example, reported last night, quote, Trump two-gender edict could upend X identity on passports. Yes, you heard that correctly. People can state that their gender is X on passports. It's one of the innovations of the Biden administration. And now a bunch of leftists and federal agencies are upset that X isn't going to be valid anymore. I guess X genders will have to go get new passports. And CNN is playing this up as a big civil rights issue. Now, not to be outdone, gender activists at the so-called People's Rally this weekend were up in arms as well. The journalist Savannah Hernandez spoke to one of these activists, and this is footage that belongs like in a museum as a kind of monument to this insane and defeated ideology. Watch.
I can't pee in 4% of America right now. So
you can't pee in 4% of America.
In 4% of America, it is illegal for me to use the men's restroom in government buildings.
So because of the biology bill that they just passed?
Yes, because I am biologically female, I cannot use the men's restroom in Florida or Utah.
What would you say to people who would say, well, just use the family restroom or a gender-neutral restroom if it's available? Like, what would your thoughts on that be?
What am I supposed to do if there isn't a gender-neutral restroom available? Am I supposed to just hold it? Or am I supposed to just wet my pants? Literally, there's no point to it other than to keep trans people out of the spaces they belong in, because, you know, they use the excuse of like, oh, how are you going to know if it's someone claiming to be a woman just to get into the women's restroom? And it's like, those people are going to be doing things in the restroom that are going to set off red flags. You don't need an additional law on top of that to keep trans women out.
Now, you really can't watch that and come to any other conclusion other than the trans activists are absolutely cooked, as the kids would say. They have no response to the overwhelming rash of defeats that they've suffered, except to claim that whatever this means, they now won't be able to pee in 4% of America, which, you know, not to get into the nitty gritty, but I'd argue that the average human being through the course of their life, even if they have an overactive bladder, will probably pee in far less than 0.00001% of America. So this woman has 96% of America left to pee on, you know, by her own math, which I don't know where she's getting it from, but hardly a crisis. And more to the point, until yesterday, it was the official position of the U.S. government to take idiocy like this seriously. We were all supposed to respect their so-called gender identity, whatever gender they say they are, wherever they say they have to urinate. We were supposed to just submit to it, surrender our common sense, all because someone like that will say, well, it makes me sad if I can't pee in the restroom that I want to. It is an eternal embarrassment for the country that we ever allowed any of this to happen to begin with. But there's no time like the present to turn back from it. And what's happened now is that these people have been relegated back to the fringes of irrelevance, where they belong. They are no longer driving U.S. policy. They are no longer going to get people fired from their jobs. They are no longer going to be able to demean and humiliate women in this country, all in the pursuit of their confused and narcissistic desires. Trans activists have lost. That doesn't mean they're going to go away. It doesn't mean that we can rest on our laurels. It doesn't mean the culture war's over. It doesn't even mean that gender ideology itself is necessarily over for good, but it does mean that they are very much on the losing side and they have very little power anymore. Even the big tech companies are claiming that they're going to stop enforcing speech codes meant to cater to these people. Truth and sanity, two prerequisites to a functioning, thriving society, have prevailed on this issue. And now it's time for our country to function and to thrive and to never let people like this hold any power over our lives whatsoever for any purpose ever again. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.